Okay, so welcome into the shop. Real quick, for those of you who don't like the voiceovers, there's a link in the description to go to a video that does not have the voiceover. Apparently, some of y'all like to watch these videos because they help you fall asleep at night. That's great. I hope that helps. We're going to get on right now with the voiceover and get started on this. I'm going to be cutting dovetails by hand in this video, and I'm not going to touch on every single aspect of it, but we're going to cover a lot of it. So let's just jump right in. So anytime you're making a dovetail drawer, the first step is to fit the parts of the drawer, the sides and the fronts and the back, to the opening. So I start with my two sides. I'm fitting the width of them. The length is not a concern. And I've roughed them out on the table saw slightly big, and I just use a hand plane and plane them so they fit very snugly in that opening. Now here I've got my shooting board out with a low angle jack planet, and I'm working on the drawer front. And it is a little, actually this is the drawer back, let me correct that, and the opening is a little out of square, so I'm using that sandpaper just to kick the workpiece a little out of square. It kind of is a way to rig it up to make it work. You can see the fit is perfect. I want this to fit nice and tight, but I want it to slide in to the opening, and that is perfect. That's exactly how I want it. Anything that's out of irregularity in the opening, you can match that in the drawer fronts and backs. So I'll move on now to laying out the tails. I always cut tails first, and I use dividers to lay those out. I'm using calipers to get the tails, and then the spacing between the tails, I just use my Starrett ruler. The little indentions in the ruler help you set up dividers, and I've set those to 1/8 of an inch. And I think the big tails are 7/8, or maybe an inch. So I'll just switch out and pin a little hole and just kind of work. Dividers are the best way to lay out spacing. You'll get it accurate, and it's super fast once you have them set and ready to go. Once I have the divisions set, I'll just take my pencil and a square and actually put the tip of the pencil in the little hole from the dividers and just move the square to the pencil and mark my line. Now I'm going to mark the actual angle of the tail. I have a 1:7 ratio laid out on my windowsill in my shop, and that's what I set my bevel to. And I just go through and mark those angles with the bevel. 1:7 is, I don't get, a lot of people get crazy about their bevel angles. I just use a 1:7. You can use a 1:6 or a 1:8, but I like the way 1:7 looks. Always mark the waist. It's good for your mind. It's easy to cut on the wrong side of the line if you don't mark the waist. Okay, real quick, I want to pause things. I just want to explain. I almost made a pretty big mistake here. Unfortunately, I stopped. You can see my saw curve is about halfway down. I laid these out as full dovetails, which means they would have gone all the way through the front of the drawer front, which is not what I want. I want to do half-blind dovetails, and I'm glad I caught it, because if I would have cut all the way to my original baseline, I would have ruined this piece. What's going to happen now is I'm going to move that baseline up about 1/8 of an inch, and that'll conceal these dovetails in the front, so you won't see them. If this doesn't make sense, it will here real soon when we get to assembling the drawer. But I just wanted to explain to you guys that I laid these out wrong, so I'm gonna make the quick change, and then we'll get back to cutting these. Okay, so thankfully we avoided that mistake. As you can tell, I'm moving that marking line up right now. And when I assemble the drawer and hand plane it to fit, we'll take all the marking lines off, so I'm not too concerned about the double lines. So when you saw tails, you want to focus on getting a 90-degree to the board. The angle you're cutting is not super critical. It's going to affect the look of the dovetail, and you want to try to keep them all the same, because your eye can catch it if you get off a little bit. But most importantly, you want that dovetail to be perfectly square to the face of the board. That's going to make sure you get a good fit when you assemble it. So the back of the dovetail, I don't cover a lot of that process in the video. I mean, it's very similar to the half blind, but instead it's a full dovetail, so you're going all the way through. But you'll see a few shots in here where we work on the back. When you cut tails, it's the angle of your cut is going to become more and more natural the more you cut. So I suggest you mark out a lot of lines if you're new to dovetails and just keep cutting, keep cutting. I could probably not lay out the angle and get pretty close just by feel, because I've cut so many of these. And if you do that repetition, it's going to really help you get that angle dialed in on your saw. So now I've got my two pieces set up. I'm taking the waist out. Now, normally I would do this with a coping saw, but I don't have any good blades for my coping saws. I broke the last one in the dresser project I did. So I'm using a chisel here and just pounding out the waist. This is just as good as the technique, a little bit slower, but works just as well. I've got a 1/4 inch chisel that I'm hammering down on, and this is my 1/8 inch chisel, I come back and work that waist out with. And I don't work all the way to my line here. I'm about 30 seconds ahead of my layout line. I don't want to work all the way to it just yet. I want to get the waist out first. So we'll go about halfway down on this side, flip the boards over, lock them down with the hold fast, and then do the exact same thing. And this time when you hammer down with the 1/4 inch, you're going to break through and knock that waist right out. There's a little bit of breakage in there, but it doesn't matter. It's going to be hidden when you assemble the drawer. And that's it. The waist is gone. So like I said, I'll come back now. I don't show it in the video and come right to my layout line and chisel down real clean with that 1/4 inch chisel. Here you see me laying out the blue tape. This is a new method. I've done this maybe the last 2 or 3 times I've cut dovetails, and I've grown to really like it. You don't have to use this method, but I love how helpful it is in transferring the tails onto my pin board. This is the front of the drawer we're making the transfer to, and I just use a razor blade and scribe that tape around my tails, and it gives me a perfect match. That razor blade really gets in those tight spaces, so it's real easy to make that transfer, whereas with a pencil it can be a little bit trickier. There's something about the contrast between the wood and the tape that helps my mind get a really exact cut on my pins. So I've really adopted this method. I think Mike Pekovich is where I learned it from one of his books, and I'll put a link in the description to that. I like it. Like I said, you don't have to use this, but it is something that I've been doing, and I do think it's helpful for me personally. Another thing that the tape helps is when I feel like when I cut, I have just a slight little proud edge of that tape to kind of work my saw close to, and I don't know, something about that helps me out. You'll notice as I'm cutting here that I'm actually blowing away the sawdust because it collects right there on top of that pin board, and I can't. It's really important that you stay right on the edge of that tape. So I'm just blowing away that sawdust so I can keep my eye on the saw and where it's cutting. That cut is going to be crucial in you chiseling down out the waist in a little bit. So it's really important that you get that cut right. As you get better and better with dovetails, you want to try to get closer and closer to your line. When I first started cutting them, I would cut further away from my line just so I could come and fit them later, but that creates so much more work. And there they are, look really good, right on the line, right inside that tape, and they all look pretty straight, which is what you want. Okay, so here I'm taking out the waist material. I've done this a lot in the past with a router, which is a really fast way to do it, but I'm showing you how to do it here with a chisel. And recently I was at Frank Strazza's shop, a mentor of mine, and he was cutting some dovetails. We were shooting a Have It Made series on him, which will be out soon. And he was taking the waist out with a 1/4 inch chisel, which I was like, why is he doing that? Why doesn't he use a wider chisel? I've always used wider chisels for that. And it was kind of mind-blowing how fast he was able to do it. And you can see here, even though we sped it up, the 1/4 inch chisel is way quicker. You have a smaller cutting edge, you can hit on it harder, and it went way faster. So I've switched over now. That's what I love about this stuff, is you kind of always are learning. And so when you're taking that waist out, I would recommend using a 1/4 inch chisel. Now, before I take it out of the hold fast, I go all the way back to my layout line here and cut those bottom shoulders. Then I'll go back and take the waist out in the vise right here. Now, the trick with this is you can see the angled line that's from my handsaw. So I'm working back to that hand-sawed surface. You can either go down on the pin or across the pin, depending on what the grain gives you. Here you can see I'm cutting down, no problem. It's not splitting. It's a good, nice, clean cut. On the other side of that pin, it was splitting the wood fibers, so I had to go across the grain. So you're going to want a really sharp chisel to do that cross grain cutting, so you're not breaking or tearing fibers, but you're actually slicing through the fibers on the cross grain. So I'll just go through, make the fit, and here you go. It's a really pretty good fit, and there's a lot more work involved in fitting these than you see in the video. So I don't show the glue up process because it's not that exciting. I basically put glue on it and clamp it all together. Taking it out of the clamps, the next step is to start planing it to fit into the opening, and this is always one of the more exciting parts, because you start to clean off your dovetails and see them finished. And surprisingly, to me, they always look better after you hand plane them. And this is a great point here to show off how I hold a drawer in my workbench. I clamp it up off the surface of the bench, get a board, slide it under the drawer, and then I grab my hold fast and lock that board in place. You could also use a clamp here if you don't use hold fast. And now you have a real quick and easy way to move your drawer in and out of the vise, and it holds really well. I've got a low angle jack plane here. This is what I usually use to clean up drawer sides. It's great on the end grain, and has a little longer sole than my 4.5. So it keeps things a little flatter. You don't want to take a lot off here. You want to sneak up on it. The last thing you want is your drawer to get too small, because like we all know, you can't add more wood to it. So you just kind of take your time, move slow. The more you do this, the better you get at it, the quicker you get at it. And the way I've set mine up, there's really all I have to do is just clean the surface off. I don't need to take a lot off the drawer to make it fit. So once I do the sides and the back, I will do the top and bottoms. And again, this is something where you do not want to take off a lot of material. Basically, just make those joints where they meet the front and the sides level. They shouldn't be off level by much at all, if any. So you're just basically cleaning them up, both top and bottom, with a few passes. And then you get to fit the drawer and see how it goes. So you can see it's a little tight there. It won't go all the way in. Pretty typical to have to do two or three test runs here. I'll just take it and put it back in the vise and take a few passes off each side. One thing that helps too is if you sand a little bit on the side, you can see the burnish marks when you slide it in the opening. But if you do sand on it, be sure you get the sand off, the dust off, before you hand plane, because that'll dull your edge, because sandpaper leaves little pieces of sand behind. So the fit looks pretty good. It's a little bit tight, which is what I want. I'm still going to do some adjustment on the top and bottom. I can tell, just from experience, I could tell it was hitting on the bottom a little bit. So I'll make a few passes on the bottom of the drawer. And you can see here too how the bottom of the drawer is constructed with that groove for the drawer bottom to slide into, and then it screws into the bottom of the back. So that is the fit I want. It's still just a tad tight, but once we put finish on this oil and then wax it, it'll slide really nice in there. So it's exactly what I'm looking for. I've got this nice little drawer pull I turned on the lathe, so I've got to glue it on, wedge it in place, and then slide the bottom in, and this thing is ready to go. Real quick, I just want to thank C Design Company, who designed the logo on my new t-shirt, Stay Sharp. Super cool shirt. There's also stickers that go with it. You saw it in the beginning of the video. I would appreciate you guys supporting the channel, heading over and picking one up. Go to bunkerbranding.com. The link is in the description. There's also a link to C Design. If you need t-shirt designs, they are the guys to do it. Okay, so I'll just saw off the back side of this drawer pull, hand plane it flush, and then we'll put the bottom in and oil it, and the drawer's ready. It really came out looking good. I hope you guys have enjoyed the build. I hope you've learned something from this. One thing to note is that this finish has one coat of oil on it. So what I'll do is put a couple more coats and wax it, and it'll slide beautifully in that opening. It'll get even better than it is now. So be on the lookout. There will be a playlist popping up, and I'll put it in the description for more dovetail videos if you want to learn more about that technique, more about that process. I've got a lot of that on my channel. As always, I really appreciate you guys tuning in, and we'll see you next time.